Welcome to the Vancouver Power BI Modern Excel User Group Meetup for Thursday, November 18th. This is actually our last Power BI meetup of the year. We're going to be taking December off from the Power BI side, although, as you'll see, we're not done with our meetups for yet. Oh, that time, yeah, hey, Ed, I hate to tell you this, but you actually have about a 6-hour presentation to go that I see here. I hope you're prepared for that. So. All right, cool. We're into the welcome and offer overview, so let's get started with this. As always, I'd like to throw out a big thanks to the sponsors that make this happen. Excel Guru that organizes your speakers every time that we do one of these meetups. SkillWave, of course, is our training division that focuses on Excel and Power BI, Power Query, Power Pivot, DAX, all that kind of good stuff there that you want to learn about. If you're looking for some great training, you should definitely check us out. Microsoft obviously helps us out. They provide us the software. They provide us speakers a lot of the time. We really appreciate the support they give us. And I want to throw out another shout out to Monkey Tools, which is an add-in that my company actually builds to help help you build better models faster inside Excel and audit both Excel and Power BI models as well. So if you haven't checked out Monkey Tools, you should definitely do so. There's a free trial of that that'll let you see how all the cool features work. Our next meetup, we do have another meetup coming up in this year. This is going to be the last meetup of 2021. I'm really excited to be having Danielle Stein-Fairhurst that's going to be joining us from Australia to talk about best practice financial modeling. That'll be very, very cool. And even though it's not the next meetup right after that, we are going to have an Excel meetup to begin the year in 2022. But our next Power BI speaker is going to be, well, he's coming up in a couple of minutes, is Joseph. But Joseph's actually going to be giving a whole session on Python integration in Power BI in January. So don't forget to sign up for that one when it becomes available. That should be a pretty cool session as well. Joseph, I can't help but notice that you've given us an up-to-date photo now. It looks fantastic. Well done. All right, so just to let everybody know as well, I think this is the first time that I get to actually say this at a Power BI meetup. Master Your Data with Excel and Power BI is now shipping throughout the world. You can actually pick up digital copies immediately at skillwave.training. That is instant gratification purchases right there. And if you like the physical copies for international customers, we'd love for you to go to the Mr. Excel bookstore, the first link there. They ship worldwide. If you're in the US, there's a different Mr. Excel store that you can get from there. In Australia, if you go to accelerator.bi, Matt is also shipping throughout Australia. And then, of course, if you just want to make this nice and easy on yourself and support, Jeff Bezos, you can do that through the Amazon link at the bottom. Hopefully there's still time to get them for Christmas. I say it will make a beautiful gift. The other thing I want to just throw out quick, Black Friday is obviously coming up. We haven't actually made any announcements yet on what we're doing at SkillWave. But if you go to skillwave.training and scroll down the bottom and sign up for our newsletter, you won't miss out on the Black Friday offers that we are cooking up. And there definitely is one coming. So if you're looking to get into the training that we offer at a reasonable price, you should totally get that onto your list. The last thing that I'm going to throw out there right before I turn it over to Joseph for our What's New in Power BI is if you are looking to get involved and would like to try your hand out at speaking either on an Excel topic or a Power BI topic, we would love to have you. You can go to this link down the bottom here at xlguru.ca/speakatvanpug. Tell us your idea. We'll get in touch with you, and we love getting new people on our stage to come and actually present for us. So please give it a shot. And outside of that, Joseph, I'm going to kill off my screen now and turn it back to you because I think it's time to figure out if there's anything new this month in Power BI.
Lovely, thanks, Ken.
No worries.
Here we go. Sorry, Teams is being a little bit slow for me.
I can't imagine that ever happening.
No, I know, surely not. All right, we should be good now.
Awesome.
Cool.
I can see your screen. I think we're good to go.
Lovely. All right. Yeah. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I'm just going to kick today off with a what's new in Power BI for this month, November 2021. Just before we get into Power BI and looking at the what's new blog post, just wanted to do a quick introduction of me, just in case you've not been to Vancouver Power BI meetup group before. So my name is Joseph Yeates. Currently, I'm a senior financial analyst at the Business Intelligence and Data Analyst program at Corporate Finance Institute. I also have my website and blog, feathersanalytics.com, where I blog about all things Power Query and Excel and Power BI and R and Python. And as Ken said earlier, going to be giving a talk in January at the meetup group about Python integration in Power BI. I've previously given 2 or 3 sessions at the Power BI meetup group, and the former SQL Saturdays in the Pacific Northwest about R integration in Power BI. So this is my first session on Python. So if you want to learn a little bit more about data science and how we can bring that into a business intelligence tool like Power BI, definitely check that out in January. I also have my Twitter and my LinkedIn up here as well. So if you want to connect and you have any questions about what I'm going to go over today, or just anything in general, anything sort of data and a little bit geeky, get the data nerd out, I'm really happy to connect and chat with everyone. But with that, why don't we jump into Power BI? And I'm a little bit ahead of myself. So, okay, this month in Power BI, this month's feature release has been, it's a really good one. I know some months you're kind of, struggling to fill the 15 minutes almost, or, there's great content, but it might not be interesting or really lend itself well to sort of a 15-minute summary. This month is totally different. We have so many cool features to cover. I'm only going to have time to focus on 4 or 5 of my favorite, depending on how excited I get and how much I go on for. But if you want to see all of the features that have been released, or all of the updates or the preview features, as I always say every month, definitely check out the Microsoft blog post that covers all the feature summaries. They have these every month, so you can go back and see all of the previous feature summaries as well. And generally, they group all the new features into some sections, so like reporting, data connectivity, stuff in the Power BI service, mobile, etc. So as I said, I'm only going to have time to focus on 4 or 5 of these. If you want to learn a little bit more and go into some more detail about some of the things I'm going to be covering, definitely check this out. Or as I say, if you want to see everything in the list, I would definitely recommend checking out this blog post as well. But with that, why don't we head into Power BI? And the very first feature, which is probably my favorite, or at least I think will have the highest impact from this month, is the new format tab on the visualizations pane. So it's this visualizations pane here on the right-hand side of the report canvas. And it looks a little bit different than it used to. We now have some additional icons up here at the top. We still have the build tab, and we also have formatting. So that right now we're just formatting the entire report page or the wallpaper or the canvas. And as soon as we click into a visual like here, if I go back to the build well, we can see this looks fairly familiar. These icons used to be a little bit smaller and we're actually below this group of visuals. But now they're up here at the top, they're bigger, they've had a little bit of a facelift. And when I click to the format tab, we can see that visualizations, they actually go away. So we have some more room here within the format tab in the visualizations pane to see everything. Makes a little bit better of a user experience, and it makes everything just a little bit clearer. You're not having to scroll up and down so many times. The next big change I would say is that we've now divided all of these subsections down here into 2. We have a visual section or a visual tab, and this contains all the formatting options that just pertain specifically to this visual. And we have a general tab as well, where things that impact, any item that you can place on the report or any visual you can place on the report, like the title, some of the header icons, the tooltips, they've all been grouped together within a separate tab within the Format Visuals tab. So a little bit more of a better user experience. I would say that, you have sort of fewer things, they're grouped together, and it makes it a little bit easier to find things. And if we don't know exactly where to look, we can also just search for it up here at the top as well. Another big change has been the actual toggle buttons. So now it's really easy to see at a glance. When it's on, we can see that it's a darker color, and when it's off, it's a much lighter color. and also actually says on and off within the toggle itself. Before it was kind of just a little slide bar, and the circle would go one side or the other, and it wasn't always clear if you were just looking, if you were a little bit away from your screen, exactly what was going on. So this makes a difference as well, just from an accessibility point of view, and I think this is a great improvement. One thing, when we actually drill down into a category, we have subcategories within here. So you can see when we open up x-axis, before, all of the different formatting options we actually had for the x-axis would just be in one long scroll. And we actually used to have double scroll bars sometimes. So if we had a lot of different formatting options within x-axis formatting, and we had all of our formatting options in total in this pane, we would get to a point where we'd have to sort of scroll and then move and scroll again. So that's all gone away. And for part of that as well are these subcategory options. So now we have, just the type is up here under x-axis, but we have the axis range. We have all the formatting options that have to do specifically with our values. And then all the title settings are in its own little card within x-axis as well. So it just makes for a lot cleaner, eliminates some of the minor pain points in formatting our visuals as well. And for all this great updates that have gone into the Format tab in the Visualizations pane, we also see in the Analytics tab as well. So when we expand things like Trendline, we can see it has this new updated toggle option. We have some subcategories of some grouping some of that formatting functionality together as well. So a lot more modern user experience, and I think it's been a great facelift. Doesn't change the functionality altogether that much, but just makes for a much better experience creating report visuals within Power BI. Then the next, my next favorite feature from this month has been the page and bookmark navigators. So previously, if you wanted to set up something within the report canvas itself that would actually act as like a page navigation. So if I wanted to have a button on my report that would take me to another page, like the trend page, I would have to insert a button or a shape. So, we could do maybe like a right arrow, and then I'd have to take this button. Oh, if we can move that. And then within the settings here, I would have to say, what are the, where did we go? Sorry, I should have looked at this before the before the format menu updated. Is it in effects? I don't know. Anyway,
the action card is missing.
Is it? It's just missing altogether. Is this? So yes. This is actually a bug.
Well, it's just not feature complete.
It's not coming. Complete yet. Got it.
So the action card is missing right now.
Lovely. Okay, see, this is great. So finding things out live on the fly, love it. So I should always do, whenever there's new updates, do it before. But we'd have to go in, create the button, actually go into the action card, which is currently missing, link it to like a page navigation on our report. And if we wanted to do this for like 5 pages or 6 pages, we'd have to do each of that page navigation independently. So we'd have to do that same thing like 5 or 6 times. And then we'd do the same thing if we wanted to add that for any bookmarks that we had in our report. So if I go and I open up the bookmarks pane, we can see that I've made 3 bookmarks for this particular page. And if I wanted to create kind of a button that could change the look of the report, that would enact these bookmarks, I'd have to build a unique button for every bookmark as we go through. So that's not sort of a great process to go through, and that can be really annoying when you need to go and change and update things and for your report maintenance. And what we have the ability to do now is actually add both a page and a bookmark navigator as well. So if I go to insert, I believe, and then at the bottom of the buttons drop-down menu here, we now have both a page and a bookmark navigator. So if I add page navigator, and why don't we move this over a little bit so we can see, and automatically we have these 3 buttons that correspond to the titles of our of all the pages in our Power BI report. And so we can use them to sort of toggle and go back and forth between different pages of our reports from our initial page. And within here, if I just click back on it, within the Format tab, we have a few different options of, sorry, under Visual, we have a few different options in terms of the pages we want to show. So you can see that I have a hidden page, like a page maybe under development. If I didn't want that to show within my page navigator, I could toggle that off. If I wanted to show, if I had tooltip pages, so something that I'm using to create a custom tooltip for one of my visuals, I could turn that on or off as well. And my page navigator would update, but also it's actually a live connection to our report. So if I added another page like page 2 and I go back to our page navigator, we can see that that navigation has been updated as well. So it's a live connection, and we see the exact same thing on the bookmark side as well, which I think is really cool. So I can go buttons, navigator, add a bookmark navigator, and then same thing, I can use this navigator now to go through, and as I click on or click through my different page bookmarks, my entire report canvas will update as well. So again, just a sort of, I think that this is a little bit higher impact maybe than the Format tab in the visualizations pane, because this truly was a pain point, having to go through and build more of an app-like experience for your users, that they wouldn't have to navigate through pages manually. Now we can essentially hide every page, build either a page navigator or a bookmark navigator, and as soon as we built that, live connection, and it will update as we go through and update our bookmarks or create or delete bookmarks as well. My next favorite feature from this month is kind of a small one, but we now have the ability to sort our legend. So previously, when we had a column in our legends well of a visual, like here, I have account product, and we can see that we have different color lines for each of the different account products. Before, it would just sort this column alphabetically by default, and that's the only way we could sort it. But now when I hit the drop down, we have the ability to sort legend in ascending or descending order. So right now, the only way that we can sort this is by that same column that's in the legends well of the visual. So account product. But I'm sure in the future, we're going to have the ability to control that legend by some sort of measure or a numeric value as well, just like how we can sort axes categories in visuals further down the line. But just another way that we can control the exact look and feel of our visual. One of my next features has been an update in text formatting. So we now have the ability, when we're formatting text for like titles or legends or axis, we can do, bold, italicize, and underline as well. So that's really cool, that if there's anything, we really want to call out, we can do a little bit more specific text formatting. And within text boxes within Power BI as well, we now have super and subscript, as well as bulleted lists in text boxes. So we have a little bit more control over the contents of writing into a text box, or maybe something like the smart narrative, like one of the AI visuals in Power BI. And then my last feature that I want to look at today, and probably one of my favorite, because I know it was so highly voted on within the community, was we have a new data connector in Power Query, and we can now connect to Google Sheets, which I think is super cool. So if I go to Get Data from More, as soon as that Get Data pane pops up, it's just thinking and loading. But when previously, we've had the ability to go in and connect to like an Excel workbook or a text document, and we've had some online as well, so we can like just plug in a URL. And there was some kind of workarounds where we could potentially connect to a Google Sheet or anything sort of within the Google Suite. But now, if I just search Google, we have Google Sheets, which is in beta right now. So if I connect to that, then we just have to paste in the URL for our actual Google Sheet that we want to connect to. So if I paste that in there and hit OK, this will bring us to the next stage of the connection. We have to select sign in, and that actually pops up a new tab or a new window in our browser, making sure that we can actually sign in and connect to that Google Sheet. So as soon as I've done that, which I've just done in my other window, I'm signed in properly, I can hit connect. And now we have access to all of the sheets within, or we have access to this Google Sheet that we've specified in the URL. And if I hit transform data to bring us into the Power Query editor, we can see exactly what this looks like, and we can start interacting with this data just like how we would with any other data source. So if I click back to the source step, we can see we have this new Google Sheets contents function. We just pass in a URL, and then we have access to everything that's in that Google Sheet there. We have all this information. So I love this. It's great that we can connect not just to Excel, but to Google Sheets as well. And I know I'm going to be making use of this pretty much right away, even though it's in beta, and you know, you can't always rely on, or I should say, you shouldn't just rely on it for something in production maybe immediately, because the functionality is going to change, you know, and it might break and change, as I say. But really excited to play around with this and start leveraging this in some of my workflows. So those were all my favorite features from this month. And I think with that, I think I ended pretty much on time. So I'm going to send it back to Ken. And looking forward to the presentation today. So thank you everyone for your time, and really excited to look at the presentation for today.
Thanks, Joseph. I got to ask though, you didn't cover the pie chart improvements. I know that's your favorite visual of all time.
You know,
so I'm a little shocked by that.
I really did consider doing it just for you, Ken, or at least mentioning it, but no, we'll gloss over that one for now.
There you go. That's probably a wise move, isn't it? There you go. Anyhow, cool. All right. Well, thank you, Joseph. Appreciate that. Fantastic as always. And now I'm pretty much just going to step aside quickly here and say, you know, welcome to Ed. I've known Ed for quite a long time. Exchanged lots of messages with him on Twitter back and forth. I was really excited to see that he actually got his MVP award. I think that was earlier this year, wasn't it? Or was it longer than that?
It's been right at a year ago. Exactly. It was November of last year. So.
There you go. So that was pretty cool and well deserved. Yeah, I'm just gonna step out of here and let you take over and do your thing. Okay. I will just mention for everybody here, before we got started here, Ed was mentioned that he loves questions. So if you have questions, fire them into the chat. I'll interrupt them and try and moderate those in at logical times. So you know, ask away as we go through. And now, for right now, I'm going to mute myself. It's all you, Ed. There you go.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully that will come up. So hopefully you can see my screen.
I can see it. Looks good.
Get rid of this. Launch it.
Yeah.
And we should be ready to go. Okay. So I want to talk about. This is not going to be a very technical session. I'm not going to teach you a lot of DAX or Power Query or anything like that. It's going to be more of a conceptual discussion on Power BI, what skills your team needs to succeed. So we're just going to talk through it. As I told Ken, interrupt me when I'm talking about something. I'd rather talk about it right then instead of 30 minutes later, and then we try to go back to it. We'll do whatever, but to me that makes the most sense, and I think the audience likes it a little bit better. So this is just a little bit about me. I am a principal consultant at P3 Adaptive. As was mentioned, I got my MVP award about a year ago. I've been using Power BI now for several years. Probably the quickest way to get in touch with me or see what I'm up to is look at my Twitter handle, which is there. And it's a pretty safe account to follow because I pretty much talk about nothing but Power BI. So I don't get into everything else that goes on Twitter, just Power BI. So for the agenda, the topics, we want to identify who the team is. I think the answer might surprise you as to what that team is and what it is not. We're going to briefly touch on the skills that your team will need to accomplish their goals, and that is the entire team, not just a particular group of people. And this, in turn, will help maximize the adoption of Power BI within your organization. So first of all, who is the team? And I think for this type of group, it is actually saying who the team is not. It is not just the report designers. And this is where a lot of people make the mistake to think, oh, the report designers, that's our Power BI team, great. And that will actually cause problems in an organization, because this kind of mindset, you don't have buy-in from others. Well, that's not my problem. That's the Power BI team, the report designers. Well, no, you're a user, or you own some data. It's all part of that team. So we're going to talk about how all of this integrates. And if you keep that mindset of it's just the report designers, the people that are publishing the reports is the team, and that's it, you're going to have adoption is going to suffer, and the implementation overall may fail. So let's look a little bit more exactly who now is in that team. And again, it is more than just the report designers. So it's a group of individuals that encompasses many roles in your organization, some of which, and in fact, many of which will never create a report. They'll never open up Power BI Desktop. And the key part of the team, it's the reason you have Power BI. It's for the end users. It's the people that are using it. So you may work in a company with 20 people, and you might be the report designer, and that's fine. But most people in that organization are using Power BI. If you have an organization that you have 4,000 or 40,000 employees, you have a very small number of people actually publishing reports compared to the rest of the organization, but you've got thousands and thousands of users. They're all part of the team to some extent. So let's make sure we have a clear understanding of what Power BI is. And of course, I'm talking to a user group here. You're enthusiasts. You probably know a lot of this, but I just want to touch on it. And then if you have any questions or comments, feed them into the chat, and we'll let Ken bring them up. So let's look at the key parts of Power BI. You have your data sources, Power BI content authoring, the service itself, and then finally, one that's often overlooked is administration and governance. Data sources, we're not going to look at this in a lot of detail, but basically this is your data. It might be data that's on premises. So it could be servers that are part of your ERP system. It could be files on network drives. So you've got Excel files, PDF, CSVs, whatever. Your data may be in the cloud. So SharePoint lists are a great place to store a lot of data. They could be files stored in SharePoint online. That's certainly a lot easier than connecting to a network drive. If you're trying to publish to the service, you don't have to mess with gateways when you do that. Azure data sources, so things like Azure Data Lake, Azure SQL, you just log in and it just works. And then hundreds of third-party sources. As we just mentioned, we just got Google Sheets, but you've got Salesforce, QuickBooks, many others that are built into Power BI. And then you get into custom connectors. And I don't know how many custom connectors there are. I would hazard to guess there's probably over 1,000 from different organizations that they're not big enough for Microsoft to integrate. But if you have something that you can't get into Power BI, contact that software company and see if they have a connector. Increasingly, more and more companies are providing those custom connectors. When you are authoring content, because obviously authoring content is a big part of it, Power BI Desktop is a key tool, but it is not the only tool. I spend most of my business day working on Power BI content authoring, but I probably spend 30% of my time in Power BI Desktop. I spend an incredible amount of time in Tabular Editor. I now author all of my DAX measures in Tabular Editor. It's such a nice editing environment compared to Power BI Desktop. DAX Studio, as soon as I have an issue trying to figure out how a measure is working, trying to get a table, trying to set up filters and figure out what's going on, DAX Studio is my go-to tool. If I'm working on paginated reports, you're using the Power BI Report Builder. There's another tool called ALN Toolkit. It helps you compare between different models, manage partitions. It gets into a little bit more for larger organizations. And these are just a few third-party tools that are out there. You can use Visual Studio. You can use many other tools out there. So it's more than just Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop is how you get started.
Hey, Ed, a couple of quick things there. I got to figure out how to get monkey tools onto your slide there. But the other, or the main question that we had here, Harshit was asking, on the previous slide, you had a very colorful data source that you had to use as an illustration. What was it? What was that icon related to?
This one here with the lines?
I'm guessing so.
Sorry, yeah. So this is the new icon for SharePoint lists if you're in Teams. So if you go to Microsoft Teams and create a list, that's the icon.
All right, fair enough. Kind of looks like somebody squashed the Apple logo, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does a little bit. Yeah, you're right, those colors. So if you're building basic SharePoint lists, it's the old SharePoint icon. But if you're in Microsoft Teams and you create a list, it's a SharePoint list, and that's the icon. And that app, I just stole that off my iPhone, because when you download the Microsoft List apps for Android or iPhone, that's the icon.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. So once you've got a report, obviously you need to publish it to the service. Power BI is not meant to be used like Excel, where you email files around or share them in Teams. You're meant to publish those to the service, and the model is hosted completely online. So all of your content eventually goes there. You might author some of it in the service. You can author reports in the service. I don't recommend it. It's not the best experience in the world, but you can. But you certainly publish it to the service. Dashboards, you only author them in the service. Data flows, Ken and I were talking before this call started, and he loves authoring data flows in the cloud. It's such a great experience. A little bit of tongue-in-cheek there. It's a good experience. They're working on it, but data flows are only a cloud authoring thing. Paginated reports, you publish those obviously to the service as well. And then you get into distribution methods. The web browser, I think, is far and away the #1 way that we share content with our end users, but it can be through mobile devices. Microsoft Teams is increasingly becoming a great place for content to be stored. Microsoft is pushing out the the Power BI icon in Teams. You click on that, the entire Power BI experience is right there within the Teams user interface. So Teams is, it's really not an app for Microsoft anymore. It's really becoming a platform. And then, of course, if you're in a larger organization, you might be doing completely custom applications where you've got Power BI and you're feeding it through, premium capacity, sending it to end users. They're driving around on trucks, or you've got consumers that are using it for some reason, viewing charts, whatever. So all of that still goes through the service. The service is what hosts it. Now, any questions about any of the content or the service or anything like that before we actually start looking at the teams?
I got one comment in here from Henry who takes exception to the term Power BI team. He feels it should be the BI team, not the Power BI team. Power BI is a product, right? Okay,
that's fair. That's fair. I'm not sure Microsoft would look at it the same way, but I do understand how that works. We're going to focus on the Power BI side, obviously, but yeah, I think you could take this and say this is really part of the BI team. It depends on the tools that you're using. I think when we get further into it, you will see that some of the things are much closer to Power BI, for example, data modeling, very specific ways. So we'll look at that, but that's absolutely a fair point. So I appreciate that comment. Within Power BI, you have certain roles that are very important to the successful implementation. And we'll talk about these a little bit more in detail as we go on. One of them is the Power BI champion. Obviously, the report author is a key individual in this team. The data set author might be a different individual. It might be the same as the report author, but these can be split off, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The Power BI administrator. There is a full administrative need for Power BI because you're sharing data, you may be publishing to the web, or you're trying to restrict data, you're using the new privacy controls and the privacy labels. There's a tremendous amount that goes on in the Power BI administrative portal, and a Power BI admin needs to know what all those things are. They may never create a report, but they're absolutely going to be making sure that your data is safe. And then this one is a surprise to a lot of people. Users are part of that team, and we'll explain that a little bit more. Then you have organizational role. These roles existed long before Power BI or any BI existed. These are your data and domain owners, the data steward, and the data analyst. And you may also have a project leader during the implementation phase. So first, I want to talk about the organizational roles and what that means. Now, all of these roles that I have on the screen may or may not be job titles. You probably, I don't care if you have an organization of 50,000 people, you probably do not have a person that says Power BI champion is their job title. So these are roles that individuals fill as part of their job. It could be, 5 hours a week. It could be 30 hours a week. It might be full-time if they're a report author and you're a large enough company. But for most of these, they're part-time roles within their overall role.
Yeah, let's look at that. Yeah, we got a question from Brent here. He says, at what point does a team go from the export to Excel option in Power BI to consuming data within Power BI? Is that a champion-focused task or something else?
I think it is, and we'll talk about what that champion role does. So to me, that's part, the champion will do that, and it's part training the users. But Brent's right, people are still, so many times Power BI is just a conduit. How can I get my data back in Excel through a CSV file? Which I'm increasingly thinking that is the worst way to get data out of Power BI. There's so many better ways with analyzing Excel and things of that nature. But yeah, it happens, but you have to train people and get them excited about it. So we'll kind of touch on that as we go through this, but that's a great point. So if we're looking at the data or the domain owner, these are the people that own particular sets of data within your organization. Typically, they're what we call the C-suite people, the CFO, the Chief Marketing Officer, things of that nature. They own all the marketing data, or maybe they're a plant manager, or things of that nature. They have a very deep understanding of their data, and they know what's important. They may not be very good with technology. They may not even know how VLOOKUP works, but they know their numbers. So they're very familiar with what's going on and how that data is organized. They can tell you marketing stats and quote numbers. You can give them a report and they can glance at it and tell you it's wrong. And 99% of the time, they're correct. You've done something wrong because they really understand their data and they know what's going on. They work closely with the data steward. This person's responsible for defining what the acceptable levels of data quality are. As we all know, a lot of organizations deal with multiple systems. You may have your ERP system, but you're pulling data in from maybe Nielsen marketing, or you're getting data from Amazon. You're trying to mash all that data up, and it doesn't always work right. You get things that don't match. The data steward is responsible for making sure before reports get published, that data gets integrated in such a way that things aren't mismatched, they're not duplicated or skipped. And then they work with the data owner to make sure it's at the right level of granularity. Maybe you need stuff at the item level. Maybe you can go up to a category level or a region level versus a city level or a zip code level. It just depends on your organization and what they're doing. And different parts of the organization may have acceptable levels of granularity. A plant manager is really going to care about what's going on with individual parts, whereas the chief operations officer that's responsible for 50 plants is not really interested to know there's 10 pounds of red paint at a certain plant. They don't really care. So the data steward is making sure that that level is at the right level of granularity across the organization, depending on where that is. Often this person is a database administrator, but not always. So it could be your database administrator is also taking on the role of data steward. And that's what I meant earlier. Data steward might not be on anybody's job title or resume, but somebody in your organization is responsible for that. Then you have the data analyst. This person has the deepest understanding of the data. Sometimes they're too deep. I think some of you, I know I'm a data analyst, we get so deep in the weeds, we don't step back and look at it at a broader view. because the data analyst is really down deep trying to analyze the numbers. They do work closely with the data owner and the data steward, making sure that data is kept at the right level for departmental needs. They're also responsible for defining what the key metrics are, average sales per customer or per region, what the prices are, things of that nature. So if you're working with if you're the report designer, for example, you're going to work with the data analyst to make sure that the right metrics are being reported for your organization. And it is very possible that this person is also a report author, maybe even a data set author. It just depends upon how deep their technological understanding goes and how much time they have. So those are the organizational roles, which again, may or may not ever touch a Power BI product except for, on the web when they're viewing their reports. So any questions or comments surrounding those roles before we move on to the Power BI roles?
I don't see anything in the chat at the moment. Nope.
Perfect. Let's go on to my favorite role, the Power BI champion. And many of you are the Power BI champion. I was a Power BI champion in a previous company that I worked for before I became a consultant. This is the person that can't stop playing with Power BI Desktop. They're doing all kinds of ridiculous things in Power BI Desktop because they're not really interested in what their real job is. They're like, oh, let's look at the new tool. Let's look at how the new formatting pane works. Or they're putting, simple things that you can do in Excel in 5 minutes. Why do it in Excel in 5 minutes when you can fully automate in Power BI in 6 hours, right? So they just can't stop playing with the desktop tool. They're always monitoring the blog, looking for new features or attending user group meetings. They're looking at YouTube videos, etc. And their enthusiasm for Power BI is infectious. Now, to Brent's question earlier, let me go ahead and get all of the bullet points on here. To Brent's question earlier, this is the person that is looking at it going, if you want to get your data out of Power BI and into Excel because you need to do something beyond what the report is doing, which is completely understandable. You may be doing property tax reporting and you can't just email a Power BI report to your property tax authority. It has to come back to Excel. Excel is absolutely the right endpoint for a lot of reports. It's a lot better to use something like Analyze in Excel, where the data is live, you've got the measures, you format your table the way you want, and then you print it off or export it, et cetera, versus the exporting to CSV file. The Power BI champion is the one that's going to figure that kind of stuff out and help people and communicate that information to the end users, because often the end users don't know what's possible, right? They're not big Excel users. They're not exploring new menus in Excel. They just launch it and do the same thing they do every day. And that's fine. The champion is the one that kind of helps figure that stuff out. So they're kind of rolling out those features. This person is a key to successful adoption. I would doubt there's a lot of successful Power BI implementations where there's not a champion on site somewhere that are going, hey, you can do this, you can do that, you can quit doing this in 10 hours a week, and you can cut it down to 10 minutes a week in Power BI once we get it set up, et cetera.
Hey, Ed, we got a question from Henry on this one. He asked if the champion will be inherently biased towards Power BI anyway.
I don't think so. It just depends. Because this person might just love technology. So, they might have Google Looker in their organization and they're tinkering around with that. So it's not that they're inherently biased with Power BI, but this is someone that's drawn to Power BI. And as we go through and look at the features of Power BI and what some of the skill sets are, it's some of the things that just make light bulbs go off and they're like, oh my gosh, I can do this now in 5 minutes a week once I set everything up instead of the 10 hours that we've been doing. So I don't think they're biased towards Power BI. I think they're drawn to it. And then, once they're drawn to it, yeah, sure. They're like, yeah, let's try to do it in Power BI. But I think it's
more of a technology bias, right? Like, somebody who's like seen the benefits of the app and whatever else.
Exactly.
As Brent says, the key is the inherent dislike of the status quo rather than the specific technology. Yeah.
Exactly. But I think a good Power BI champion also recognizes, this is not the right tool for this, or it's not the right endpoint for it. Like I said, sometimes the endpoint should be Excel, but maybe it goes through Power BI. So yeah, they're going to have a bias for it. But yeah, I think you're right, Ken. I think it's a bias for the technology. So let's talk about report authors. And we're going to look at report authors and data set authors kind of at the same time, because it might be the same person and it might not be. And we'll look at how they differ. So report authors are going to have basic to intermediate Power Query skills. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Basic to intermediate DAX skills, which is writing the analytical measures. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Basic data modeling skills. We'll go through what a few of those skills are and how that works with Power BI. The data modeling skills for Power BI, they're not unique to Power BI, but they follow a very strict set of guidelines. You can't just throw anything in Power BI and have it work effectively or even at all. The report author is going to have excellent visualization skills and storytelling with data skills and phenomenal communication skills. Let's pause on phenomenal communication skills and give you an example of what I mean by this. Somebody comes to you and says, I need a report that does this. And you're like, great, what do you show me what you're doing. And they say, I have this Excel file and I have this and it looks like this. I want this in Power BI. We've all had this happen. You go and you take that Excel file and you create a Power BI report that looks like it. You deliver it and they're like, oh, that's awesome. Thank you very much. And then you go back a couple of weeks later and you're like, hey, how do you like it? And they're like, oh, it's great because now I take that and then I export it to Excel and then I do 4 more things with it and then I get my end result. And you're like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And come to find out, they're doing a process that is A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And when they needed help, they gave you step D. A good report author will say, okay, we can do that step D, but show me what you're doing, your overall process. Maybe you can take the entire process and put it in Power BI, or maybe you can get 95% of it in Power BI. And this gets back to that, again, good communication skills. The user asking for this specific report doesn't know what's possible, so they don't even think to ask for all of the steps in Power BI. They just want this one thing in Power BI. You might be able to say, well, show me your entire process. Let's see how we can kind of re-architecture the whole thing. I think it was, as Brent said, I'm not satisfied with the status quo. Let's figure out a different way to kind of redo the whole process and cut down your hours and increase accuracy because there's less human error. So you need to be able to talk to the end users at their level because they may not be great technology people. They might know VLOOKUP and that's about it. So it's about building that entire process. So any questions about report authors or comments about report authors before we move on to the data set authors?
No more comments or questions at this point yet.
All right, cool. So let's keep going. So the data set authors need to have advanced Power Query or ETL skills. So ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. So maybe they're doing stuff further upstream, which is great. The further back you can push your transformation, the better. So if you're doing it in SQL Server and you're creating views or you have Oracle or whatever your data source is, that's fine. Power Query then just becomes basically a simple conduit to get it from that service into loaded into the Power BI data model. There's nothing wrong with that. They're going to have advanced DAX skills because they're going to be building the report measures that are, or the model measures, I guess, that would be used by multiple report authors. The larger the organization is, the more likely it is you have a data set that is in the cloud. It's constantly refreshing. It's getting new data. It has a lot of key measures for it, but then there could be 2, 3, maybe even 15 reports based on that one model. And that model has to be set up properly. And the data set author is going to be the one doing it. So they're going to have those advanced DAX skills, excellent data modeling skills. They're going to have basic visualization skills. They're not really writing a lot of reports. They still need to know how the visuals work so they can make sure the measures are set up properly so it's very easy for report authors to drag fields in or even analyze in Excel users. to drag cell measures into their pivot tables in Excel. So, they're not going to be the ones that are going to create these great looking reports necessarily, but they need to know how it works. So let's talk a little bit about different data models and why certain things work and why they don't. This is a classic flat or denormalized model. This is what you do in Excel. This is what everybody does. As soon as they get Power BI, they just pull their Excel file in and they just start going to town. Everything's in one table. We can see here in this table, we have our products, we have email addresses for the customer, we have marketing campaign IDs. It's just a mess of data. It's not set up properly at all. It's difficult to understand. If you need to add more information, you just start adding more columns over here. It just keeps getting wider and wider and bigger. It's very inefficient. Going to the other extreme, we have.
Ed, I got to interrupt with a comment that just came in. It says, "Hand this table to the Tableau team," which I think is hilarious.
Exactly. And I'm working with a client right now that is coming from the Tableau environment, and I spend hours deconstructing their flat files because that's what Tableau needs, right? So this exactly gets to one of the comments I made earlier. You build the data model for the tool. And if you're going to be a Power BI data modeler, you need to know how Power BI works. And we're going to talk about a star schema in a couple of minutes. Some of you are already anticipating that term, but you don't do it with a flat table, and you don't do it with a snowflake schema, okay? So if you're a database administrator, this is exactly how you design your databases, because it is optimized for add, change, delete operations. You absolutely minimize data redundancy. But the problem is, this is your sales table, right? So your invoices are coming in, your transactions are happening. And if you want to build a report based on the product category, you have to go way over here to this table, and that is going through this table, then it goes to this table, and then finally it goes here. What you want to do in Power BI as a data modeler is you take this table and you collapse it into this, and then you take this table and collapse it into this, and you wind up with one big, large product table. Now, are there redundancies in that product table? Absolutely. But that's how Power BI is designed. And we're going to look at that here in just a second. This is very efficient, again, for the add, change, delete operations. It is very inefficient for query models. And Power BI is designed on a query model. And that is designed using something called a star schema. It is optimal for Power BI. At the center of the data model are the facts. Okay, these are the daily operations of whatever it is you're doing. You're selling something, you're building something, you're building products, you're selling insurance, whatever it is, those are your daily facts. Surrounding it are the dim tables, or your dimensions. The date dimension is critical, but you can have customers, stores, products, facilities, whatever, all kinds of dimension tables. But it is important to understand that this is how Power BI is actually designed. This is not just a good practice. I don't know if, I'm sure some of you know this. Underneath Power BI is a product called SQL Server Analysis Services. So if you install SQL Server on your server, there is a component of that called SQL Server Analysis Services. And it's very different from the SQL Server database. And it is designed specifically with this in mind, with the fact tables and your dimension tables surrounding it, and it works much better. If you tried to do this in another product that's not designed for it, for example, Tableau, it's going to be a mess. It's going to be just as much of a mess in Tableau as bringing the flat table is into Power BI. So again, the right tool for the right job. And that's kind of why I was saying earlier, these are Power BI roles, not just BI roles, because different BI tools use different technologies and need different methodologies. So star schema is critical. So any questions about data modeling before we move on to the next step.
Now, the only comment we've got in this one from Stanton is, I mean, why assuming that the only way someone would pull Excel data would come from one single table? Like, what about pulling in from a data model from Power Pivot? But the challenge with that is that there's no connector to be able to pull from a Power Pivot data model into Power BI or even another Power Pivot models that I've ever run across, which is the same. It'd be nice if there was.
Yeah. Now you can still, in Power BI, you can open an Excel Power Pivot model directly into Power BI. It'll convert it to a Power BI report. All your visuals are gone, but your Power Query and your data model are all there. So you can convert, but you're right, you can't read directly from.
And it's a shame because it's one of these things where every program wants to be the master kind of thing, right? So, and I know certainly there's times when I've wanted to do some things in Power BI, but just read from the Excel file, and unfortunately it's not an easy thing to do. So, Henry has commented that the star is optimized for Power BI, but will Power BI try to enforce this to use a star rather than a snowflake, for example?
No, it will let you use a snowflake, and it will let you use a flat model. It will just not perform as well. And I've seen videos on super large flat models. I've experienced this. I had a meeting with a client yesterday. They had built a model. They were using, it was sort of a star schema, which means it wasn't a star schema. They had connected two fact tables together, and they were complaining that one of their matrix visual took 2 to 3 minutes to render. And they were wondering why their end users were saying, well, this renders so slow, we don't even like using a report. And I said, show me your data model. And I'm like, there's your problem right there. And they said, well, how do we fix it? And I said, we have to tear this down and restart it because you've got those two tables should not be connected to each other. They had two fact tables connected to each other, and it was a many-to-many relationship, and it was just a mess. And they wanted a quick answer. They wanted me to wave a magic wand and do some DAX and just magically fix it. The model has to be fixed. Then you can start working on your analysis. So that's what we're working on now. You basically have to tear it down and start over. So Power BI will let you do a lot of things that are bad practice, but your users are going to suffer, or they're just going to quit using the report.
I always joked with this that Power BI's original motto was 5 minutes to wow, and I said it'll take anything you throw into it, but to me that became 5 minutes to ooh wow. Not quite the same, right? So
Exactly.
A couple more questions have come in. Danielle, I think we probably answered yours around performance. So yes, data models can be much slower if they're not built properly. Sue's asking, Snowflake is not good data model versus a star. I would say that it's not as desirable, but I have definitely built models that involve snowflaking in order to get things done. But ideally, you want to put it into a star model. Would you agree with that one, Ed?
Yeah, I do. If you've got a snowflake schema and you're building a measure where you need to multiply the units sold in your fact table by, say, the weight of the product, and that is 4 tables away, you've got to have a whiteboard to figure out what your DAX is to be able to put that together into a measure. So, it's going to be slower. Every single table hop, every single time Power BI has to move between tables, there's a little bit of a performance hit. And so if it has to do it 4 times to get from, sales to product to category to subcategory to, whatever, every one of those is a little bit of a performance hit. And then it just makes it more complex because you have to remember, where's my data? It's not in the products table. It may be, 2 tables away. And heaven forbid somebody then attaches to the model using Analyze in Excel, and they try to build a pivot table. They'll never figure out what's going on. So, it's like you said. I think, from a pain point, I would rather work with a snowflake schema than a flat model if I had my, choice. But honestly, I'd rather just make it a star schema, and it makes it just so much faster, so much easier to work with. Okay.
One more comment that we got here is from someone whose handle is Office Manager. So I don't know their real name, but that's okay. The comment is, I believe creating a SAP cube in a data warehouse is a better solution. Then you can drag and drop tables, maintain the model in one place. The comment I'm going to throw back on you this, and I'll let Ed weigh on this afterwards, but I get to go first on this one here. Is I think the big thing that we want to remember in a lot of the cases here is that even though these things scale up to become enterprise level solutions, the heart of Power BI and Excel as far as doing this stuff is all really around self-service business intelligence. So going straight into, hey, yeah, build a SaaS cube is actually not an achievable solution for a lot of people. If it is, great. But if it's, if you're working with common end users, we need to keep that in mind. So Ed, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it depends on the organization, right? So, if you're building a true BI enterprise, right? And Power BI is your endpoint. You're probably going to have some data warehouses. Now, I don't know that they need to be cubes necessarily because it just depends on how your data is pulling in. But at some point, you need to abstract your ERP systems and your source systems from Power BI by having curated data warehouse in between. What that data warehouse looks like will depend on the organization or maybe even the department within the organization. But yeah, Ken, to your point, a lot of reports are self-service-ish. It may not be somebody just installed it and they're playing with it. But, even in some multinational companies that I've worked with, and I'm sure you've seen the same thing, you still largely have the same person getting the data and creating the report and publishing it. And all of a sudden, 2,000 people in the organization are using it. So Power BI makes that happen very easily without requiring a lot of the back-end work. So it just, one of the favorite answers out there is it depends. So ideally, yes, you got a nice data warehouse, somebody curating that data. Again, this gets back to your data stewards that are, making sure that everything is working right. Again, could be database administrators. So yeah, good point.
Cool.
Anything else?
That's it for questions so far.
Okay. So let's look then again at report authors and data set authors and what some of these differences mean. Let's just look at DAX. So DAX it's an acronym for Data Analysis Expressions, and it's a functional language. And if you cannot use Power BI without using a little bit of DAX. And it's driven by functions like sum, filter, calculate. There's a few hundred functions in the language. It's very Excel-like on the surface. So when people see sum and count and average, they think, oh, I've got this, and they start working with it. And it's kind of like Ken's point earlier, it's 5 minutes to wow, because with sum and count, you can very quickly get there. But it's quite different underneath. And once you start doing additional things, you need to know more about it than it's just kind of like the Excel sum function or kind of like the average function. So report authors and data set authors must understand a concept called evaluation context. And we're just going to briefly touch on what that is and why it is so important. But it is one of the things that completely separates Power BI from Excel. So let's talk about evaluation context. I would say it is the single most important concept to learn about Power BI, not the only concept by any means. But if you do not understand evaluation context, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to have very, very simplistic reports, and you're not going to be able to get out of it what you need. Evaluation context is comprised of two things. Row context. These are rows in the table, not a table visual that you would see in a report, but the actual underlying table in the model. And we're going to look at that in just a minute. And then, most importantly, I think, is the filter context. And this is what makes Power BI magic. And the filters come from many places. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into row context. So as I said, these are rows that are actually in the table. So here is an example of that. I have a table on my screen. This is the table view in Power BI. and it's just a bunch of invoices and sales information. And what I've done is I've done something that is very Excel-like. I have created a formula. I've added a new column over here called margin, and I simply said, do the unit price minus the unit cost. So it's kind of like, subtracting column A from column J or whatever it is. Very Excel-like, and it's easy to understand. I didn't have to tell it what row it's on because it knows every row is standalone. It understands how, it will never worry that this data in this row will get confused with the data in this row. And it results in a new column that gives you the correct result. So we simply took, $1,300, subtracted our cost of $400, and we got the $868 margin. You could now take that margin, drop it into a visual, and boom, now you can see your sales versus your margin, et cetera. This is not an efficient way to do it. You do have to understand what row context is, but creating calculated columns should be a last resort. I go to great lengths to avoid calculated columns for a number of reasons. So that's row context. Let's touch base on filter context. Again, both part of the evaluation context. These are filters applied by the model. What do I mean by that? They come from many places in the report. If you have a table or matrix visual, it's the columns or rows in that visual. If you have a bar chart, it's going to be coming from the axis or the legend. It could also be coming directly from filters and sliders in the report. So again, there are filters that are applied by the model. And let's look at what that means and why Power BI is so magic. Here we have an extremely simple, probably the simplest of all measures. This is not a calculated column, it's a measure. It's a formula in Power BI. I don't know why they call it a measure. To me, it's just a formula. I'm sure there's some BI term that dates back 20 years why it's called the measure. And we're simply summing the sales quantity field. One formula is being calculated about 45 times on the screen and coming up with different numbers. Why is that? Let's look at this red box here, the 339,000 units. It's one formula, sales quantity, but it's saying first, look at the year, it's 2009. So it's taking this table, and this table in this database is the Contoso database. If you've ever played with it, I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with it. If you ever read a blog article, this one's a limited set. It's a couple 100,000 records. It looks at that, and it goes to the date table and says, I only want 2009. So now my, let's say it's 300,000 records. Now it's only 100,000 records. It's only a third of my data set. Then it says, let's go and look at the brand Contoso. So now it's further filtering the data, right? Then we look at the color, and we have black, brown, or purple. So if it's either of those colors, it keeps the information. And then it looks at our three countries, Portugal, the United States, United Kingdom. And it takes all those filters into account, and it says there are 339,000 units. It does the very same thing down here for Tailspin Toys in 2007. It just applies the Tailspin Toys brand, 2007, et cetera. When you get over here in your total column, it's still applying by brand, but it's ignoring the year and adding up all of the years. And it's the same thing down here at the total row. So in Power BI, totals in a visual are not adding columns or adding rows. It's recalculating the measure, sum of sales quantity, reapplying a new filter context for the totals. And in the case of totals, something is being completely eliminated. And in fact, if we look down here, it is ignoring all of the brands and all of the years. It's still getting information from these slicers over here, but it's reapplied and it's taking into account all years, all amounts. Okay. Now, let's combine this with row context. So, same matrix, now I'm looking at sales. So remember I said earlier, what I want to do is this is the total sales dollars, okay? And to get sales dollars, you have to multiply the quantity times the unit price because there's no sales dollars in this particular model the way I have it set up. Now, again, I could have created a calculated column in Power BI that multiplied quantity times price in the model and then just did a sum of that price. That's not efficient. That takes up room in the model. It doesn't compress as well. There's a number of technical issues there that slows it down. I'm not going to get into all that. I can do that in a measure. So instead of using the sum measure, I'm using the SUMX formula, okay? And these are called iterators. Sometimes people call them the X functions. So we have sum, count, and average. There's also SUMX, COUNTX, and average X. Concatenate X, there's about 15 iterators. And what it does is it says, okay, let's go to the sales table, create a row context, and it goes through this 300,000 record table, lightning quick, and multiplies the quantity times the price. It will do that over millions of records in less than 10 milliseconds, okay? It is super fast. So now we have our row context and we've created our formula that we need. Then filter context comes into play. And again, it's doing the year 2009, Contoso, we have some slicers over here, and we have $29 million in sales. So by understanding the entire evaluation context, both row context and filter context at the same time, we can now create just about any kind of measure we want, any kind of visual that we want. Imagine trying to do this in Excel. The formula would be amazingly complex if you had one table and you're trying to create this with one formula that dynamically updated no matter what happened. So this is kind of where the magic of Power BI is. So any questions about that overall evaluation context?
I don't see any questions in the chat on this one, no.
Okay, and again, this is not a technical session where I'm going to teach this. This would be like an hour of deep dive learning. It's just, these are the skills that your team needs. So whether you're doing it or you've got people in your organization that are learning it, you need to make sure evaluation context is very, very high on their list.
Perfect, Ed. Now I'm going to break out for a question because I did have one that was asked to be saved for later, but I think this is a perfect opportunity to actually ask it. So the skill sets required for these team members are obviously diverse and complementary. So the question is, can you comment on a small team in a small organization? Can you expect all of the skills for these things to be contained in one or two people?
Well, so it depends. If they're going to be responsible for everything, they have to know all of it. Now, how deep do they have to know it? It depends on, how complex the models are and the data and everything coming in from various places. This is where people start relying on consultants to help with that. It can take years. I have a certification in Power BI. I've been using it for years. I do it day to day. I am still learning. I today just spent a lot of time looking at the group by function and the current group function, which I very rarely use. And so I've got, articles and stuff like that. So I'm still learning. So you can't expect one or two people to know everything and get it all done. Sometimes you need consultants, or sometimes you just say, you know what, we're not going to do that. One of the places I hang out, though, is the Power BI community. You have questions? Go ask it in the community. Good chance I will see it, or one of my compatriots will see it, and we'll help get those answers. So, yeah, this is one advantage of having a large organization. You can have people that really do a deep dive in DAX or really do a deep dive in Power Query versus one person trying to learn all of it. Okay.
I'm gonna hit with a follow-up one on this, which is,
sure.
Is this Excel is ubiquitous now? Will Power BI expect to extend to the organization like Excel in the future, or Power BI always be kind of niche? I just want to throw a qualification on that question before you answer it, because when we say Excel is ubiquitous, I think we need to be really, really careful on the fact that Excel is ubiquitous as a product that gets installed on your desktop, but Excel knowledge is not ubiquitous. And I think that's something that's really, really important. I don't know. What's your thoughts on Power BI? Are we going to see it installed on every desktop, Ed?
Well, I certainly don't think you're going to see the Power BI desktop installed on every desktop. It doesn't need to be. But I will tell you, in organizations that I'm working with, there are more people using Power BI because so much content is available there than are using Excel, because no longer are files being created by the super user of Excel and emailed to 50 people. That's going away. And so that super user may now be a report developer, and they're publishing it to the service, and it's being distributed that way. So Excel is never going away. I love Excel. It's never going away for the analyst and the person that's doing a lot of extra work. But for the people that used to just get Excel files and open them up, it's going to become less and less, and Power BI or whatever BI tool you're using is going to be more and more, because all they want is the answer. They don't care what the vehicle is. They just want the answer of to get their job done. They need to know what the sales were last week so they can go and talk to certain customers, and they don't need to be doing a bunch of VLOOKUPs or whatever.
Yeah, I think I would sort of, I agree with that. And I mean, I think one of the things interesting about these two is that the skill development between Excel and Power BI, a lot of the stuff is very, very similar. So, I mean, I think that you'll see that a lot of analysts will end up, analysts in particular will end up having both programs on their desktop. And I mean, Danielle says, I mean, she thinks that Power BI is pretty mainstream. Clients and employers seem to expect it as part of a skill set. Yeah, I would agree that it definitely is going more that route. Another question that we've got regarding the team roles, how do the Power BI team roles you've talked about, especially report author, dataset author, DBA, Power BI champion, map onto a typical corporate organizational chart? Says I can tell who's towards the top, CMO, CFO, data steward, but are there any other roles that are normally entry level or mid level?
It just depends on the organization, and it really depends on the people. If you're a large organization, you're going to go out and interview for people that know Power BI or whatever your BI tool is, and they're going to have certain certain skill sets, and hopefully you've got certain tests. I have seen a number of reports developed by quote unquote Power BI consultants that are just worthless because it's just hundreds of calculated columns, and they drag them onto the visuals, and they stink. I'm thankful for those people because I have a job because of them, because I go and tear those things down and rebuild them, and then reports start refreshing in 15 seconds or less on the page. So, you do need to have the proper training for it. But as far as, if you're starting Power BI, you're going to look for those people internally. The person that's the Excel wizard, they're probably going to gravitate towards Power BI and get interested in it, because at some point they really learned Excel. Okay, if you don't dive in and play with Excel, you're never going to even learn VLOOKUP. You're just going to know how to print and create a table, and you've seen the reports they build. There's not even a sum function. They keyed it in and then typed it in with the calculator. But the people that learned Excel because they read blog articles and they played with it, they're going to be the same ones that are going to gravitate towards Power BI and learning that. If you find them, spend money on them, foster it, books, courses, classes, seminars, let them learn, because it's going to pay back dividends for the company. So I hope I've answered the question. If not, rephrase it or let me know where I missed it.
Perfect. We've got one question. How do you deal when the end user works on a MacBook? I mean, my first response to that one would be something like, find them a job at your competition. But the reality for that one, honestly, is if your end user is actually consuming reports, they can consume reports on a MacBook, no problem, because Power BI just is developed or delivered through a web browser. If you're looking at actually having them be somebody who's building reports, then you need something like Fusion or Parallels or something like that to get them online with that. The other question that's here, I'm going to try and put to bed really quickly because it's actually a question about VBA. VBA, folks, for those of you who are still using it or still learning it or whatever else, is going to be around for a long, long time. The Excel team is working on a replacement language in Excel Online using JavaScript and TypeScript and whatnot. But until that language actually exists both on desktop and is fully feature comparable to what's actually in there in VBA, it's going to be sticking around forever. I mean, you got to realize that the VBA or XLM for macros are still in the product because VBA never even completely replaced those. So it isn't going anywhere anytime soon. There is a replacement language that is being built right now, but it is far, in my opinion, from being ready for real world work, especially on desktop things. We don't have any Power Query abilities, any Power Pivot abilities. So, that one's sticking around. So, and you'll never see it come to Power BI Desktop. They just won't invest in there. And honestly, I don't blame them because it doesn't run on web. So, knock that one.
Yeah, I would add to that. I would fully agree with everything you said. I would add to that. If you do not know VBA, I would not bother learning VBA at this point unless you have a very specific use case, though. I used to know VBA really well. Once I found Power Query, I have forgotten so much VBA because I used it to transform stuff in an automated way, and Power Query is so much better, so much more robust at transformation. So if that's what you were using it for, I wouldn't bother with VBA anymore.
Agreed. And I mean, I know I teach a VBA class, Ed, and the first question I ask people is, why are you here? And if they tell me that they're about data transformation, I say, it's great to have you in the class. I hope you learn lots, but you came to the wrong class. You could be taking a class on Power Query. That's the reality of it today. It's the onboarding for learning is far too high for the benefit. Go get your Power Query and learn to get your time back in your life. Then you'll have time to learn VBA because you'll have automated everything. It'll be great.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and I'm hoping that the language in Power Apps, which is Power FX, I'm hoping that comes to Power BI through the service, because there's a lot of automation I would like to do in the service, but it's about user interactions and visuals and things like that would take it beyond the level of bookmarks. But I don't know where we are on that. We're probably years out. But to your point, Ken, VBA will outlive all of us. It's going to be around. But I wouldn't invest time in learning it, to be honest, for most things.
Yeah, well, that'd be good, because then, we can actually retire like the COBOL programmers that people keep calling because there's nobody that knows the language, right? Just us old folks.
Exactly.
Although I think Brent's given us one valuable reason, right? The VBA button that runs the refresh all command. I mean, that's basically what we need it for today.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
But you can do that in Power Apps, Power Automate now. So
there you go.
I use Power Automate to refresh reports because I can do it in a far more granular manner than the scheduled refresh in the service. So, but yeah, there's a lot of Microsoft would love to replace it.
There you go. All right, that's it for questions so far. So let's get you back in to go.
Okay, cool. So let's briefly talk about Power Query. So it's an ETL tool: extract, transform, and load. So you're pulling from your data sources. We talked about that. You're doing some sort of transformation. Even if you're doing nothing but renaming the fields, do not bring in those nerd titles that come from SQL Server. That's great for SQL Server. Put those in plain English or whatever the language of your user is, not camel case, regular words with spaces, so everything is easy to understand. At least you're doing that. And then it loads it to the model. This is how data gets into the model itself for most things. Even direct query goes through Power Query. Power Query is the one that's doing the interpreting and converting everything into your SQL statements or whatever your direct query tool is. Data set authors will need anywhere from minimal skills to pull from database tables to build a star schema to absolute ninja skills from other data sources. If you're pulling from SQL Server and some PDF files from Amazon and some stuff from SharePoint, you're going to have to be really good in Power Query. This is something that I know Ken can attest to. He teaches courses in Power Query. It can be a wonderful tool, and it is there to put stuff, as far as Power BI is concerned, into a star schema. Now, I know if you're dumping stuff into an Excel table, there's different tools you're using or different features of Power Query. But basically, from a Power BI standpoint, it's getting whatever your data is into a star schema. And I'm not kidding when I will say that there are times I spend 80% of my report development time in Power Query modeling the data properly, so I have a good model, however that is. I mean, there is not a star schema. There's multiple ways to do star schemas and how the data is brought in, and when you've got headers and details and how you bring that in. And sometimes you do it wrong and you go back into Power Query, redo it, see how it works. That is a big part of making your model efficient and loading fast.
Okay, so I got a question for you now, man.
Yeah.
You say you spend 80% of your time doing that most of the time, or are there times that you actually don't have to spend 80% of the time cleaning up your data? Because I haven't found those, man. That's where I'm always living.
Only if I am in an organization that has a real good, that they understand data models, and so they've built data warehouses that are based on that. So, but it's rare. It's rare.
I don't run into those very often. We did get a question in here just on, so we're back to programming languages. SQL, is it worth learning SQL? And I'll give you my quick comments on this. I'll let Ed throw in on this as well. If you're connecting to a relational database with Power Query and you're actually, building your query through the user interface, Power Query writes the SQL behind the scenes for you in most cases, unless you break query folding. Microsoft is trying to get better indicators in place to indicate when that happens. But for the majority of, certainly for self-service BI pros, you probably will never need to, should never need to actually learn how to write SQL, because Power Query will do it for you. If you do decide to learn SQL, it's an extra feather to have in your cap, another arrow in the quiver. It's awesome, just like it's awesome to learn VBA if you have the time, but it shouldn't necessarily be necessary. So if you don't learn it, I wouldn't worry about it today. Let Power Query do it for you. Ed, your take?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I don't know. I know enough about SQL to be able to read some of it so I can see what it's doing, but I don't know SQL. I don't know Python. I don't know R, and my monkey brain cannot handle it. I know M and DAX, and that's it. And I can't learn anymore. So I don't worry about not knowing SQL. If I need somebody to build the SQL database and build a bunch of stored procedures and whatever, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to hire somebody to do that. Just like if I need a new kitchen sink and a faucet, I'm going to hire a plumber. I don't need to know how to do everything. I do what I do, and I'll pay people to do the stuff that they're really good at. So unless you're building relational databases and doing all that kind of stuff, you don't need to know SQL any more than your database administrator needs to know DAX. So if you want to learn language, have at it. Do you need it? I don't think so.
Perfect. Awesome.
So Power Query. This is typical of something that as a Power BI report writer, this might be your data source. And this could be a manual spreadsheet that's coming in from someplace. This is going to be fairly easy to convert into Power BI. You're going to have to do some pivoting. You're going to have to get rid of your total rows. You don't need those. But this is not going to be a complex Power Query experience. It's going to be relatively easy to do. If you get this, you're going to have fun for a few hours. You can absolutely convert this into a star schema in Power Query, but you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out where your accounts are, matching it up with your amounts, getting rid of, some of these totals, or bringing the totals in at the right level, or taking your sales tax and allocating it. So this is where I was talking about. This becomes like the ninja skills in Power Query to get data into the system properly. And unfortunately, this is what you have sometimes. You don't have access to the backend tables where it's very easy to connect. You might be downloading something like this from Amazon.com, and you're just getting a big CSV file or worse, a PDF file, and you've got to go and pull that information out and pull it into your report in a robust way. Power Query can absolutely do it, but this is where you're going to need a lot of advanced skills. So anything about Power Query before we move on?
No, I was just going to say that doesn't look that bad to me. If you get that, come take our Power Query Academy. We'll teach you how to fix that up. No problem.
Yeah. I know you could, and it's and this is not even the worst. I'm sure in your class, and in fact, I know in your class because I've taken it. You got some just really hairy examples.
Oh yeah, I got way worse than that for sure.
Yeah, how do you fix it? So, but yeah, it can be done. You just it's just a matter of being creative and figuring out how it works.
I'm just gonna take another sort of side one here. So we got the next one. Should we learn how to write M? I love this question too. You guys are really, really interested about programming languages. So here's the deal with M. If I were going to pick a language to learn, it would be DAX. It would not be M. and I'm the Power Query guy, okay? And the reason being for it is because everything that happens in Power Query, for the most part, is actually driven through the user interface, and it writes the M behind the scenes for you. It also writes the SQL if it can. M is, I mean, I program in about 6 different languages, and I got to tell you that M is one of the ones that I think is actually the ugliest, least graceful programming languages. There's others that would disagree with me, but the reality is on it is that if you don't have to learn that language, I think you're actually in a better state. And as much as the Power Query team is building everything, they're building a user interface so that you don't actually have to interact with the language underneath it. So again, learning M, phenomenal skill. It is great. You can do all kinds of really cool things, but every few months, the Power Query team adds a little tweak here or whatever else that removes some of that need for M. I mean, they'll put on a user interface for merging that used to have to write M to do, or grouping and whatever else. And I mean, these things are maybe not as changing as rapidly as they used to, but again, the reality is on it is, you know, it's one of those things that just adds a little more power if you have it. But at the end of the day, honestly, hopefully no end user should ever really have to read that. And certainly, I think when we look at the roles that you're talking about, Ed, you know, when we say that people need, you know, basic to intermediate skills in as far as Power Query goes, when we get into M, we're talking advanced language at that point in time. So you want to try and avoid that if you can. And IntelliSense and M sucks. That's a tooling problem, and they're working on that. But yes, it certainly does. So
yeah, and I'm actually. I would take a little bit of a different approach. I would, if you're going to learn a language, I think DAX is important. But if you don't spend enough time on the Power Query side, this is where I've seen people over rely on DAX, and they're using DAX to do their transformation. And that's where things start getting ugly. So you don't necessarily have to know the M language and fire up the advanced editor and just start keying in, okay? I actually do that. I love doing that, but I love the M language. But you're right, you can do a lot of it through the user interface, but you can't do everything through the user interface. I was working with a client just yesterday, and we needed to do a group by and concatenate some fields within that table. And the only way to do that was through the advanced editor, because you can get the group by, have all columns. Then you're using things like text combine, and you're breaking out lists and doing things. You just can't do that through the user interface. And I've seen people do that same thing in Power BI, and it gets a lot more complex. So at least understand what M is capable of. And, you know, Ken, I would like to hear your opinion on this. I think the user interface in Power Query can probably do 35 to 45% of what M is capable of. The other 50 to 55% is advanced only through the advanced editor.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that big a ratio. I mean, I think the user interface can. I mean, I guess it depends on how deep you really want to go down that hole, right? I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I tweak things with, you know, writing a list function and things in order to build calendar tables and whatnot on a regular basis. But I guess my feeling is, I mean, and I don't want anybody to misinterpret. I'm not saying you should learn DAX over Power Query. I'm saying DAX over M, and I'm being very specific about this. I believe you should learn Power Query over DAX. But I believe you should know how to manipulate Power Query, use the engine and the user interface in order to reshape your data properly to land it into a data model so that you can actually have, you know, as much DAX as you need to get things done. As Sue sort of said on this one here, is, I mean, you know, so what you're saying is really use it to the point where the UI can't help me, and then we get to learn a little bit of M. Absolutely. That's sort of the place that I would generally go with it. I mean, I can't say honestly, you know, Ed, your example of grouping and trying to concatenate within the grouping, absolutely valid, but I don't know that I've ever had the need to do it, right? So that's kind of the piece where you look at and go, you know, do you go and tool up in preparation for it or whatnot? I mean, the comment that just came in is learn dimensional modeling first. Absolutely. I mean, that's an important part, but you also need to know how to build the tools to be able to create the dimensional model properly. Yep. My big sort of thing with Power Query is I teach Power Query to users who will never go near a dimensional model, because it is useful for so much more than just dimensional modeling. It's useful for that refresh of the data cleanup and whatever else. Then it goes
Right.
into Power Query. We teach more and more about that. Then we go into dimensional modeling. Then we go into DAX. Then we go into visualization. And then once you've actually got to that point where, geez, this is trying to do something really hard, now we go and explore the programming languages to become, power up and become that superhero. That's my
Right.
order that I used to go for.
And I would agree. And to me, it's use the right tool for the right job. And even if you don't know fully how to use the tool, know what the tool is capable of.
Yes.
You can get it to do what you want either by Googling or by calling someone and saying, hey, I need a Power Query expert or I need a DAX expert to come and do this thing. But know what the tool is capable of and where you do certain things. Some things you absolutely do in Power Query. Some things you absolutely do in DAX. Other things, it could be either one. And sometimes you do it in one, you figure out it's better to do it in the other. Just right tool for the right job. Don't be the hammer and think everything is a nail.
Exactly.
And that's what Power BI is. It's got two different sides to it. So, okay.
Perfect.
So real quickly, I know we're kind of running up time, so I'm going to kind of speed up through this, but we had some great conversation, which I really appreciate. A lot of good questions and comments. I also brought up early in the process about third-party tools. It's not just about Power BI desktop. And I'm just going to go briefly over DAX Studio. Why would you want to use it? Let's say that I need to create a measure that returns the average sales value for all red products sold in 2009. Can you do this in Power BI desktop? Absolutely. But it's going to be tricky because, and don't criticize my DAX here. I kind of threw this together in a few minutes. This will give you exactly what you want. The problem is if you do this only in Power BI desktop, it's very hard to build these individual components and see what's going on. For example, this is not a value, it's a table. And if you know when you're building a measure in Power BI, you can't return a table. You get the error that says there's multiple rows, it can't find a particular value. It needs what is called a scalar value. Now you could go in the data modeling side and create a temporary table and do it that way, but that's kind of a mess and very slow. DAX Studio is one of these tools that will let you return both tables and scalar values, and you kind of build the thing up piecemeal. And then when you're done, you go and you copy and you paste it back into Power BI desktop, and your visual is done. And so it has a lot of tools. For example, what is this red 2009 table that I've built? Well, down here, I'm actually returning the table. That's what the query is. So I can see here a sample of what it looks like. I can see it has 300,000 rows. I could even dump this into a CSV file if I wanted to and do other analysis with it. You just can't do that with Power BI desktop. So understand that there's these tools that help you do the work, but then once you're done, you just take all your DAX code, you throw it back into Power BI, and it'll return the amount you need, and you know you've built it properly. Now, let's look at the last, probably the most important one, Power BI users. This is the most important point of Power BI. You don't have Power BI for yourself. You can play around with it. You have it because you have users that have reports. But all Power BI users need to be trained. Some Power BI features are very intuitive. Others, not so much. Drill through pages. How slicers work, just filtering data. Drilling down and back up hierarchies. Even finding their reports in the service. Using a Power BI app. How do they share reports with coworkers? How do they find reports that were shared with them? People go back and look at emails. There is a one-click operation in the Power BI service shared with me. If you don't show users where that stuff is, they're going to forget and say, hey, can you share it with me again? There's never a need to share something with somebody again. They just need to be able to find it. Commenting on reports in Teams. Without training, reports will go unused and adoption will fail. And remember, everyone in the organization is a Power BI user. I teach a course in training end users how to use Power BI. That means they can then go to the Power Report developer and say, hey, I want a visual that does this, and I want to hover over it and get a custom tooltip. They don't have a clue how to do it. They don't need to know how to do it, but they know it can be done. They want their report to work that way because it will deliver a great experience without a bunch of extra data, and they can communicate that to the Power BI report developer. So Power BI users must be trained. Don't just launch it and send them a URL and say, here it is. If you don't train them, it's going to fail, or reports are going to be unused. Any questions about Power BI users or comments?
There's one comment on how to refresh data, and I was typing up a reply to that. Do you feel that an end user should be trained how to refresh data?
No, because what I do is, if that is an issue, I put a refresh data button in through Power Automate, and then the user can push the button on the report. It goes to Power Automate, and it triggers a refresh. And then it sends them a message in Teams saying your refresh has been scheduled. It'll be done in a few minutes.
Okay, that's a better answer than what I got. I mean, I was just going to say that, I mean, ideally, I think that those things should have to be set up and scheduled, so it shouldn't really be the end user's problem to refresh the data. But I mean, you know, for an on-demand data set, that makes sense.
Yeah, I have one client that they have a report that they need to give the bank every day, but it's not at the same time every day, and it's only after the checks have been run. So they run the checks, then they push a button, the report refreshes, then they can go to the bank and type in whatever the relevant information is in the bank website. So that's an on-demand report, but I did not bother training the user on going to the service and finding the refresh button and blah, 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 blah. They just do it right through the app. They push a button and it just works.
You know, Ed, I think we might have you back to actually show people how to build something like that.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, it's a Power Automate combining Power Platform with Power BI is really brings up some interesting possibilities.
So throw me a note in the chat if you guys think you'd be interested in something like that. Well, we already got one agreed, so that didn't take long.
Yeah.
Go.
we can look as early as I don't know what your schedule is, but yeah, we can contact.
We'll connect offline and we'll start something out. Yeah, perfect.
Absolutely. Okay, perfect. Right. Okay. Real quickly, because I think it's so often overlooked, is the role of a Power BI administrator. They're the ones working to keep your data safe. They work with the management and legal team to make sure things are not shared improperly. We have over here an example of what the Power BI administrative portal looks like. It scrolls for pages and pages and pages. There's about 50 to 60 settings here that you need to know what the defaults are and how to change them to what you need for your organization or even for particular departments. They may never build a report. They may not know any DAX, but they understand at a surface level the entire process. And when something breaks, they know who to go to. When something gets shared improperly, they know how to go fix it. They know how to go fix it so it can't be shared improperly. Every organization is different, and you want to lock down Power BI so it's not Wild West, but you don't want it so locked down that they start creating their own stuff, kind of the shadow IT thing. I call it constrained creativity. Because again, if it's too loose, then you've got redundant reports, data, multiple workspaces. It should be one workspace. But if you have it locked down so tightly, they're just going to have a bunch of Excel files with their own data in it. So it's that constrained creativity. So again, how reports are shared, at what level, etc. So they're going to have to know about everything. And this is my favorite visual on Power BI. Dustin Ryan has done it. Many of you have probably seen this. This is the entire Power BI ecosystem. And this is a 2 or 3 hour discussion for this slide right here. But this is everything in Power BI. Down here at the bottom, we have your on-prem data. You have the report building process, what's in the service. The Power BI administrator needs to know how all this works. Not coding the DAX, but understanding how the data flows and moves about. Report users have their little piece, data warehouse people have their piece, etc. But the Power BI administrator knows the whole process. And if all of that is done right, it's going to increase adoption. It's going to be more successful. If you have users that are not trained, they're not going to use it. They're going to go back to Excel files. They're going to be doing their own VLOOKUPs. You're going to have things that don't match, and you're missing the whole point of adopting Power BI and getting everything into one cohesive strategy. So hopefully, if you now have a better sense of how the Power BI team, what that means, whether you call it the Power BI team or just the BI team, it's more than just the report author. It's almost everybody in the organization. If they use Power BI in some way or touch it, they're part of the team to some degree. So that is all I have. This is the consulting firm that I work at. And if you have any questions, you can get in touch with me there. You can get in touch with me on Twitter. And are there any final questions as we kind of wrap this up? Or comments?
I don't see any other ones in here, but there are certainly a lot of comments that we'd love to have you back and take a look at the Power Automate integration on this.
Okay.
So Ed, listen, thanks. That has been a fantastic presentation. Really enjoyed it, and the comments are pouring in to agree on that right now.